All right, I think we're ready to get started. So I'm very excited to introduce Dr. Maya Ackerman, who's going to be talking about algorithmic songwriting today. Just to give a little bit of background, Dr. Ackerman earned her PhD at University of Waterloo, and after that she did 2 postdoctoral fellowships at both Caltech and UC San Diego. And she's currently an assistant professor of computer science at San Jose State University, and prior to that was an assistant professor at Florida State University. So quite an exciting background, and I know that this topic that you're talking about today is really like a growing interest topic in the computer science community, also in the music community. So I'm really glad you agreed to come and speak about it today. So let's give Dr. Ackerman a round of applause.
Thank you. And thank you, Blair, for the wonderful introduction. I appreciate it. And thanks for having me here. It's even just the vibe here is so wonderful. The music and computing, everything blended together. A piano in a classroom. I'm just totally in love. Okay, super happy to be here. Because it's a talk and I'm physically here instead of a video, feel free to ask questions. I'll make sure that we stay on track as far as time. Don't worry about it. Anything that pops to your mind to clarify things, something you're curious about, don't be shy. Okay, so how did it all start? How did I end up working on algorithmic songwriting, which is a very tiny field. Algorithmic composition, of course, as many of you know, is a fairly big field. But within its songwriting, combining algorithmic composition with the lyrical component, with natural language processing, is actually very small. And I sort of fell into it. As a kid, like many of us, I did drama and music, and I sang. And then sort of all of that ended, and I ended up going into computer science. Really fell in love with coding and eventually computer theory as well. Couldn't imagine doing anything but keep studying computer science until my husband took some voice lessons. And I thought to myself, wait a minute, that was supposed to be me. And so I took the classes as well and really fell in love with that too. And so I ended up, for the second half of my PhD, I spent about equal amount of time on computer science as I did on studying singing, ended up learning opera, and kind of developed these 2 parallel lives, which were not intersecting at all. I did machine learning for my PhD and later as a doctoral fellow and professor, and became a semi-professional singer on the side. And I was kind of unhappy with this double life, to be honest. There was a lot of dissonance. Before I tell you how it all got resolved, one of the goals I had in the artist track of my life was to be able to perform original songs. Those of you who are musicians in the audience could probably attest to the importance of having some original music when you're a musician. There are some limitations in the music world if you're always performing other people's works. So I wanted to have my own music. Now, making a song, as a singer, it had to have words in it, right? Making a song is remarkably complicated. There's a lot that goes into making one song. You have to be able to sing it, produce it, come up with a melody, come up with an accompaniment for it. So I was actually on the side while kind of getting a job, being a postdoc. I was trying to master all of these things. So I kept learning how to sing. I spent some time learning how to produce music. And that was fine. But for some reason, coming up with melodies was not coming naturally. And taking piano improvisation lessons, studying piano for another year, for some reason didn't help. It just wasn't coming easily to me. Coming up with melodies is notoriously difficult, and that kind of became the roadblock for me. And I was very disappointed that despite all the time I put into it, it didn't look like coming up with original songs was going to be something that I'm going to be able to do.
What is phone position?
Yeah, that's actually kind of funny. I should probably change that. I put these into a word cloud, and I typed it correctly because there are some compositions here as well. But I thought it was kind of fun, so I left it in there for now. But that's a word cloud being creative along with us. Vom position. All right.
Composition.
So things started going. So my whole life actually got redirected after I attended ITA. So that's an information theory and applications workshop in San Diego. It's kind of located close to UC San Diego. And I decided to go for no particular reason. I've been invited every year for a while. And so I flew all the way from Florida, where I was working at the time, to this workshop. And I was having a lot of dissonance at that time. I was really in love with the music part of my life And I was getting a little tired of doing theoretical machine learning of the same type. And right around that time, I attended that workshop, and there was a small part of it, a really small section, just 3 talks, connected to computational creativity. There was somebody talking about a visual art system, somebody showed some computer-generated music, and another person, Margareta, showed his storytelling system. And I was just completely shocked that this stuff even existed. I somehow managed to not be exposed to it at all before. I waited till the end of the section of that session to talk to them, followed them to their hotel for about an hour with a long walk. And in that hour, they told me a lot about computational creativity and told me there was a conference coming up. So I signed up to go to the conference. And during the very first session, somebody said in that conference that we can think of a computer as a collaborator instead of a tool. Maybe it doesn't sound like a big difference, because ultimately it all lies on a spectrum. But this idea of thinking about the computer as a collaborator, immediately I thought, wait, there's this problem I've been having coming up with melodies. Maybe I can collaborate with the computer about coming up with melodies that I can then sing, fill in the one hole in the puzzle that I was missing. And that was it. I pretty much redirected my whole research agenda to focus on algorithmic songwriting at that point. So this led to the creation of Alicia, originally created by myself and David Locher. So it's a system where you give it lyrics, and it comes up with melodies to which you can sing these lyrics. And it can give you as many options as you want. Okay, that's kind of the basics of it. Later it was extended by my student, Christopher Cassian, who is now actively working on the project as well. It's been getting a lot of attention, which really came as a surprise to me. None of my I've actually just, the moment I published it on ArcZiv, journalists started getting in touch with me. It was so it's kind of fun that people are interested in this work. Okay, so Alicia is data-driven, which means that instead of having an expert system where we kind of capture one musical style into the system, which it then imitates, here it figures out how to create melodies directly from the data. Now, before I figure out into how much detail to go, how many people here are from Karma? So sort of about half. Okay, so I can probably go into some detail. All right, so we train the data on music XML files. So essentially, we have a melody line, and then the syllables that you sing with each part of the melody. Right, that's what the training looks like. It's about 30 pop songs in the original system that train it. And the model that we picked, so it's random forests, which is more complicated than Markov chains. You see, nobody has ever before looked at this relationship between lyrics and melody. So in some sense, this is the first songwriting system that focuses on melodies. But there's a lot of work, not a lot, there's like 3 or 4 papers where people come up with the melody separately, usually using Markov chains, and then they come up with the melody separately and the lyrics separately, and then they just kind of artificially impose them on each other. Right, so compared to Markov chains, random forests give you a lot more freedom. The reason we picked random forests at this point is because creating the data is notoriously difficult. We had to manually enter all of this data because we're not getting it from music files. We need music XML files. As we get more and more data, we can look at more complicated models like various forms of neural nets. So of course, features are very important in a machine learning system. So we have both musical and text-based features. So for the musical features, there is stuff like key signature, the duration of each of the notes, the previous 5 notes in both the rhythms of the previous 5 notes and their octaves and the scale degree of the previous 5 notes. And then we also have information about the text. So in particular, just looking at how the word is written is not good enough. We have to know how to pronounce it. Because to sing something, it's all about how you're pronouncing each one of the syllables. So we have the pronunciation of each one of the words broken down, the vowel associated with each syllable, and also other kind of more meaning-focused features, looking, for example, at the frequency of the words. Okay, and we're kind of expanding the semantics of the system. So these random forests are created through a combination of both of these types of features.
And these are like the frequency of the words within some given corpus as the input, or within like?
Yeah, so the attempt is within English. That's what it's trying to estimate. Yeah, which of course is an approximation. Yeah.
And do you like search the keywords to test out like the emotions? Is it sad or is it happy song? Like things like that?
Yeah, so sentiment. So that's actually one thing that we're adding right now. So to add sentiment analysis as features. So both at kind of the small level, is this word happy or sad? But also looking at the whole sentence, because that can be different, right? You can have a happy sentence with sad words in it, and vice versa. We know that. Okay. Any more questions about how this part is set up? That's kind of like the meat of this system, explained in one sparse slide. Of course, now one of the nice things about machine learning is it gives you some accuracy. So for those of you who are not familiar with machine learning, just to quickly explain the concept. I was talking to a journalist recently, and she liked the following explanation. Okay, so the way that machine learning systems work can be somewhat compared to a child work. So a child, for example, a parent might want to teach a child the difference between cats and dogs. So we show them some animals, and we say, okay, this is a cat, this is a dog, and after a while, the child learns. So here we show our system a whole bunch of music. Again, this is for the non-computer scientists in the room. So here we show our system a whole bunch of music, and what we're hoping is that after a while, it will be able to predict what the next note is. Okay, be like, okay, I think the next note is a C, that's a quarter note, etc. Okay, so we train it on 75% of our data. It kind of looks at a whole bunch of notes, trying to learn these patterns. And then on 25% of our data, we want to check how well it learned. So we start looking at the music. The system knows what it has seen so far. And now for the next note, it makes a guess. It guesses what the next note is. Let's say it guesses that it's a G, middle G, I don't know, whole note, right? And then it's either right or wrong. Right, so let's say it got the pitch right. That means that improves the accuracy of our melody model. And if it didn't get it, if it's not exactly a G, then the melody model, its quality goes down. Right, and so we calculate the error based on how many times it got the notes exactly correctly in the test set. And so we have 3 separate models. We have one to predict the octave, one for the rhythm, and one for the melody. And these are the accuracy. So for octave, it's quite good. But you got to keep in mind, there aren't that many octaves, especially octaves that you would expect a vocal line to fall in. Right? So it's nice that it's 90%, but that's also not very surprising because...
What if you predict that each note's octave will be the same as the previous note?
Yeah, then you're already doing pretty well. You're not going to be at 90%, but you probably... Maybe even around 65, I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah, so this is not as impressive as it appears because there just aren't very many options. And notes don't jump around too much when you sing. You don't have too many leaps. Actually, that's one thing. That's how we knew that we were improving our system. At first, there were a lot of leaps. And then as we kept improving it, there were fewer and fewer leaps. Okay, that's the rhythm model. And that's perhaps the most impressive accomplishment because there are quite a few options for rhythms. And we got a 78% accuracy. And for melody, so that's scale degrees. 65 looks really bad at first glance, but there's 11 options at each step. So this is much, much better than random. It's actually pretty good. I do think it can be improved beyond 65. I think maybe we can get into the 80s. I don't think we can get anywhere too close to 100 because there is real randomness in music. There's legitimately multiple options when it comes to what the next note is going to be. But we are working on maybe getting this into the 80s, I think would be realistic. Yeah?
So when you train the AI, do you just play the CD or do you have to transcribe the music?
So everything is completely transcribed.
Okay.
Yeah, that's part of the reason why growing the data set is a little bit challenging. So it's music XML format, so every single note and every single syllable has to be entered. Yeah. Yeah.
Have you compared the accuracy as opposed to using Markov chains and higher order?
Well, you can't do this with Markov chains at all. That's part of what's so novel about it. So with Markov chains, sometimes they're used to create melodies, but then you can't connect it to the text, at least not in any natural way that's really genuinely suited for Markov chains. So what you get with these more complicated models is that you can make up these arbitrary features. So you can tell it, take into account how frequent these words are, what the syllables are. Yeah, whereas Markov chains are really limited.
You could throw away the text and train the Markov chain just.
Oh, absolutely.
And use that as a baseline.
Absolutely, and in a way we have some information as to what would happen because with these models you get to find out how influential the features were. And the text-based features do make a significant difference. And that's how we know that if we were to just throw it into a Markov chain, it wouldn't be nearly as good.
Right, but you could evaluate against the Markov chain and still see what the distinction is.
That's right,
The
that's
other
right.
thing is I'm looking at like melody and you're talking about accuracy, right? In general, you could say, like you're saying, there are multiple choices. There are also multiple choices which are harmonically the same as potential, right? So you could go up a third or down a third or up.
So we could be more forgiving in this.
You can almost, yes, exactly. So there can be more wrong, I guess, in the sense of like, is it musically more wrong to go to this note versus another note?
That's David, by the way, my colleague on this, everybody. So what he's saying is that we're actually using a very strict measure here. So if it's not exactly the right scale degree, that's just considered completely wrong. But in principle, we could do a more forgiving measure that would say if you're harmonious with it, then that would be, a smaller penalty.
Wrong note cost function.
Exactly.
It seems a little bit harsh to say if
Yeah.
it's harmonically the same. Like it should be think about less of.
Well, it kind of gives us motivation to keep working, right? All right, any more questions about this one? Yeah.
You said the melodies, this is just Western melodies, so if I were to give it the Middle Eastern melody, it might not be.
So we did try that, and I'm going to talk about it a little bit later in the talk. We tried Puccini music. So ultimately, we would like the system to be very flexible. You feed it any corpus, and then it picks up the style of the corpus regardless of what it is. But what we've learned from our Puccini experiment is that to properly capture different kinds of music might require different types of models. So our hypothesis at this point is that to do a very good job with Puccini music, we would need something like neural nets, so we need to collect more data and build a more complicated model. But yeah, ultimately that would definitely be the goal, to have this complete genre flexibility. All right. Okay, so this is music professor Joshua Palkey from CSU Long Beach. And he used Alicia to make a song. This was really fun to get feedback from a musician and see what he can come up with. The reason I put it up here is to kind of explain how it works. You type one sentence at a time. That's approximately the length for which the system does a really good job. And then you get a whole bunch of options for how you can set that sentence. Then you pick the option that you like, repeat for the next sentence, and string them together. Okay, so the system comes up with fairly short melodies, and then the user is still actively engaged in the process.
So each sentence is an independent forward pass through your model. It's not
That's right. So you could
initialized with like the state left over from the end.
You could. There is a way to do that.
We added that
Yeah.
feature, so yeah.
So there is a way to do that as well. Yeah. Okay. Now, most recently, we added some co-creative functionality. And that's really important because the whole point is to aim for a system that's more of a collaborator than a tool. And so we need to give some ways to directly collaborate on creating these melodies. And so one way is a similarity feature. So we can think of the problem of coming up with melodies as a search problem in a really big space. So the space of possible melodies is enormous, right? Those of you who are musicians can imagine how huge that space is. And so when you're trying to come up with a melody for a specific lyrical line, you're searching that space. Now let's say the system gives you, Alicia gives you something that's pretty good, but you're not completely happy with it. So you want to search around that melody. So there is a way to do that. There is a way to ask for similar melodies. Okay. Another co-creative function is to keep the rhythm, but to change the scale degrees, or vice versa. Keep the scale degrees, change the rhythms. And that's something that came up with Josh when we were working with him. He said, oh, it'd be really useful if I could keep one, but change the other. So that way, the system and the person can collaborate on a melody. This can have impact in many different domains. So originally, when we started on this, I imagined it being useful to electronic musicians. So they're often not, sometimes they are, but they're sometimes not classically trained. And so maybe having a system that would help them come up with melodies could make original melodies more common in the electronic domains. Those of you who are familiar with electronic music probably know that a lot of it centers around remixing. And it's often presented that it's on purpose, which I'm sure it is largely. But given how difficult it is for some of us to come up with melodies, making that option available to electronic musicians can actually have an impact on that type of music. We might see more original songs in electronic music. I was also surprised to learn when Josh Palkey was working with the system that he found it very useful, despite being a very trained musician, because he told me he prefers to focus on harmonizing and finding chords and arrangement, and that coming up with melodies is neither his interest nor his strength. And so this kind of system can have impact all the way from electronic music to classical music, and perhaps everything in between. All right, I'm going to finally show you one of the songs after all this talking. Okay, so this song is called Hope is a Thing with Feathers. The lyrics are taken from Emily Dickinson. You guys know Emily Dickinson? She had this amazing poetry. She's sort of ahead of her time, writing in the 1800s. Very forward-thinking person. Thousands of human composers have set her music, have set her words to music. So we thought it'd be interesting to take those same words and try to set them using a machine. So for this song, the melodic phrases are by Alicia. The arrangement is by music professor Josh Palkey. I'm going to sing it for you. Ronan Ackerman produced the background track that we're going to hear, and the lyrics are by Emily Dickinson. And I get to sing a song in a computer science talk. Okay, hopefully the volume is all right. So you'll be able to follow along. Here are the words. That was fun. Okay. Yeah.
Drum and the company music come from the Alicia?
Yeah, so it doesn't, right? So this is very much a collaboration where Alicia is one of the contributors. So all Alicia does is contribute to the score, to the musical score, and she comes up with the melodies, kind of with a voice line. My brother did the production. But that's something that we're looking into, expanding Alicia into all these various domains, coming up with the arrangement, the automated production, so that then anybody can come in and say, this is a part of the process that I enjoy. Let a system do the rest, or at least let a system give suggestions for the rest so the person maintains some creative direction. There was a question there. Yeah.
How do you choose the key of the song?
So that's manual as well, and we have been allowing ourselves to transpose it up or down to fit the singer.
Okay, and like major, minor,
Oh,
modes or any of that kind of
yeah. I don't think they can necessarily tell yet if it's in a major or minor. That's a good question. We haven't explored that very well, but we do provide the key. Yeah, but I mean, major or minor is more subtle than specifying the key, right? Because it can sort of change from a C major to an A minor silently.
Yeah, okay.
But yeah, that's user provided for the most part. Yeah.
Do you define any initial parameters?
Yes.
On how you want the music to go? Or?
So the parameters are pretty broad at this point. They don't narrow down the search very much. So there are some basic parameters like key signature, time signature. But beyond that, the interesting parameters, we have kind of an explore exploit parameter, which lets you set how much randomness you want in there. Do you want the system to just sort of give you what it thinks is more likely, or do you want a little bit more flexibility? So that's one parameter to get to tune. And then, of course, there are the two co-creative features, which help you.
But how about how the music evolves? How the song evolves?
So it does about a sentence at a time at this point, right? So very often the evolution of music is a little bit more global. So when you have the whole score, the whole melody, that's where you see more of the evolution. And that's kind of in the collaboration between the human and the machine at this point. But it's something we're looking into. We're looking into making Alicia able to create the complete melody. And then it would be nice if we could specify the arc, kind of when it goes up and down. Even if it could, sometimes I just want to draw the arc for the system and let it figure out the details. So that would be really cool. But still in the future work, but I'm really excited to play with that. Right, if you could just take a pencil and just draw the arc of the music, let it figure out exactly how to get there. Yeah, that'd be really cool.
Those arcs can also have a large influence on your emotional response.
Oh, yeah.
Whether they're continuous or discontinuous, and your perception of, if there's multiple voices or not, then that distance between them, so that drawing the arc actually could be huge.
Maybe we should first make up the arc, and then based on the lyrics, make up the arc, find out where the emotional parts are, and then based on that do the, here we go.
So it can be high and in the same plane, or
I think a lot of this
Cool,
also
yeah.
is probably based around, what are the features that are musically relevant, right? Like things like movement and things like the shape, and how do you bring that in to let the system see what that value is in order to be able to predict something based on it, right? To encode that somehow, how far is the music moved so far, and what direction is it moving, where should it be going, like this kind of thing.
If you want to learn the arc through the machine learning system, yeah, that would be that could be challenging.
It'd be nice to have a deep learn system where if you had enough of a training set where you wouldn't have to encode all these features, right? But at this point, having such a training set is very far off.
I think I'm getting some ideas talking to you guys. So. yeah.
If this is for songs that might have a repetitive verse or some kind of rhyming structure, how can you, other than just giving it all the different sentences and seeing which one you like best, is there some kind of way to give it all the words at once and kind of getting a best fit melody that could be repeated for all the repeating kind of rhyming structures?
Oh, I see what you're saying. It's okay, I want this melody to work for the following 4 sentences because that's interesting. Again, it's something we haven't done, but I like this a lot. I think if we could measure the fit between each one of the melodies and the other sentences and pick the one that best kind of optimizes all of them, that's a good idea. I mean, this is a field, right? I mean, there's a lot to do in here, and I'm really excited to tackle more of these challenges. I like the ideas you guys are proposing. This is great. Okay, so we already did this. One thing I wanted to briefly mention, which actually connects to the last question, this idea of evaluation. So we recently gave Alicia the ability to evaluate its own work. So it's not good enough for a system to generate. In fact, the computational creativity community, and I'm sure related communities, really don't like systems that just generate. They call it mere generation, and they think that that's very silly. A system has to be able to evaluate what it does. And kind of rank, this is better than that, being able to select among its art's works. It just kind of brings to mind a really frustrated composer who worked for a long time on a song, but then looks at it again in the morning and throws it out really angrily. So we made Alicia become its own critic. And that was really fun, and it actually turned out to be more useful than I originally expected, even for the co-creative process. So our measure of quality for melody is a balance between likelihood and entropy. So likelihood is basically how likely was Alicia to generate that melody. Just because it generated it doesn't mean it was likely to generate it. So for example, again, for the non-computer scientists in the room, let's say if I say that algorithmic songwriting is great, that's something that I was likely to say. Okay, so there's like a high probability that I would have said that. But then if I'm having like a really bad day or having a fight with my spouse, I might say something that I was very unlikely to say. Even though I said it, I was unlikely to say it, right? It's not something that I say frequently. And so the same thing with Alicia. Just because it generated a melody doesn't mean it was likely to make the specific melody. And so there's a measure of likelihood. How likely was Alicia to create that melody? Okay, and if it was more likely to create it, that's better. That's on the likelihood side, and that's balanced with entropy. Entropy measures how varied the melody is. And that's very important, particularly when you train on pop. And once you start studying pop and you look at it carefully, a lot of pop melodies like to repeat the same note over and over again, often not bothering to vary the rhythm or anything else. Just the same note with the same rhythm over and over again, long stretches like that. And so Alicia does that. It creates a lot of these really boring melodies, but it's really not its fault, right? That's what it's trained on. I mean, we could be done at that. We would be like, okay, it's a likely sequence, so here you go, user. But if we want Alicia to be useful as a collaborator, there isn't anybody who is unable to come up with repeating the same note over and over again. So it's not useful to give these boring melodies. And so we penalize them. So if a melody has low entropy, it gets a lower score. So basically balance between these two, likelihood and entropy, and if it has high entropy and high likelihood, it ends up being ranked high. And then what we do is we sort the melodies. So let's say if you ask for 100 melodies, you get them in sorted order from best to worst. And that's actually very helpful because right now, Alicia explored the space for you creating 100 melodies. And usually you only end up looking at the first few because that's where the best ones end up. So having the system be able to be its own critic is actually very helpful, even in the co-creative domain. All right, I'm going to show you another song now that I created after evaluation has been added. So the melody again is made with Alicia. I'm going to sing it for you. I produced it as well, and the lyrics are again by Emily Dickinson. This one is a little bit different in style. So I'm going to need to turn on the microphone for it and hope that everything works. Okay. I really like this.
Now it's too loud.
Now it's too loud. Hello. Okay, it's working. It's fine. I'm going to sing quietly so I can use the mic. Okay.
I took my power in my hands and went against the world. 'Twas not so much as David had, but I was twice as bold. I ain't my pebble, but myself was all the one that fell. Was it Goliath who was too large, or only I'm too small? I took my power in my hands and went against the world. 'Twas not so much as David had, but I was twice as bold. I ain't my devil, but myself was all the one that fell. Was it Goliath who was too large, or only I too small?
Exhibit number 2. Okay. All right. So you see the style is kind of different. We kind of pushed it more towards opera, put some kind of slightly more pop direction with this one. Actually, one thing that I learned from doing this is that the melody doesn't affect the style as much as I originally thought. So part of this project for me is to figure out what parts of music really influence a style so much. So I'm told the chords make a big difference. I'm not convinced yet. The arrangement, is it more in the production and the way that you sing it? A little bit of both. So that's another kind of more musical interest that could be answered through this research. Okay, Robocini. Okay, this is really fun. This is like really taking it out in a fun direction. We trained our system on Puccini music, which I briefly mentioned to Felix earlier. So this is Giacomo Puccini, you know, the inventor of O mio babbino caro and other amazing arias, my favorite composer ever. And so we created an Italian aria in Italian. And then we did something else that's really cool. Okay, so the melody is by Robocini. It was actually Rubaiyat, also known as James Morgan, from the arts department. He's a professor at San Jose State University in the digital media arts, a really fantastic collaborator. And he used Robocini to create this melody. He also wrote the lyrics, but he's not a musician at all. Like, he doesn't know how to read music. So he was able to create this with Robocini despite not being a musician at all, which I think is really interesting. And the person who made the video you're about to see, the machinist is Chantel, and the voice is mine in the recording. Okay, so get ready. Okay, before you get ready, since it's in Italian, let's quickly read the words so that you know what's happening, because there are no subtitles yet. Okay, so this is set in World of Warcraft. And there's a character. She's a female warrior. Her name is Dahlia. She's like this really big cow woman. Fantastic. And she has this problem. She wants to have a family, but she also wants to keep going on these raids because she's so amazing, and her friends want her to come along and fight with them. So she's having the struggle between her adventure life and her family life, and this is kind of like an aria that starts to hint at some of these inner struggles that she's having. Lush oases that hide the wailing caverns, vast open spaces of oranges and gold, the grasses of the prairies of wandering lizards. I've made a home and made a family in the south, in the outpost, with a small community that sees such traffic in the passing adventurers. It's kind of starting to hint at her slight dissatisfaction in this arrangement. All right, Ariado Taurajo. I'll briefly discuss my last system, Mabel, which kind of goes off in a different direction. So I'm a musician, so releasing music of it was really interesting for me. But then I ended up falling into working on the lyrics as well and totally fell in love with that. Too many interesting things to do. Have you noticed? Okay. So this is joint work with my students Divya Sin and Rafael Perez by Perez. And what we did originally was create lyrics that tell stories. Now this is the thing. We have a lot of lyrics, even nowadays, more so a little bit older lyrics, tell stories in third person. You know, there's a song nowadays about a woman starving herself to be beautiful that's like completely told in third person, right? I don't know if you know which one I'm talking about. Anyways, so this original Mabel, which was our system, actually just got in today, the first paper about it. That's always fun. There's a system called Mexica, designed by Rafael, which creates narratives, really bare bones stories about the indigenous inhabitants of Mexico City. And so here's an example of the beginning of a story that it composes, that it puts together. So the priest was born under the grace of the great God. The lady was an inhabitant of the great city. The lady wanted him from the start. The lady hid her love from the priest, but she fell in love with him. The princess was in love with the priest, so we get a love triangle. Right? The princess admired the lady, and then it kind of continues from here. Okay, so originally I thought we were going to have to do some serious processing to make it feel more like lyrics. So I gave it to my students, I had a lot of ideas, and then she came back with this suggestion of keeping the whole original story, but coming up with new lines that expanded into lyrics. And it worked beautifully. So here is one example of this. So the black lines are from the original narrative system. So again, this is an interaction between two systems. There is no human in the loop at all. So the narrative is the black lines, and then our system adds the red lines. So the first paragraph becomes, the priest was born under the grace of the great God, and evolving from the shadow lifted. The lady was an inhabitant of the great city, but just remember there's a sign of intensity. So there are many different conditions that we use to pick out these lines. So the lines are original, so they're created through a Markov chain trained on a whole bunch of English pop-ish songs, just their lyrics, okay? And so we create a whole bunch of lines, and then among these we select those that would fit well with the line that we're trying to match. So based on sentiment, at least positive, negative, or neutral. There's a lot of emphasis on the rhyming patterns. So for example, over here we see a perfect rhyme. But we don't actually always want perfect rhymes, because then it sounds like a poem for 5-year-olds. We want some of the rhymes to be imperfect. And so you see a lot of imperfect rhymes. Hymn, time, so it's just enough. Priest, got, so just the last letter sometimes matches. And when you look at modern songs, you see a lot of these imperfect rhymes. It's also very important to match the number of syllables. Otherwise, it doesn't fit together at all. And other little rules, like putting the longer lines later. So that's more or less how the original version of the system worked. And then I was quite happy with it. I mean, as far as literature on lyrics writers, which by the way is a lot more has been done on creating lyrics than on creating melodies from lyrics. I was quite happy with this because this was more coherent and it conveyed a story a lot better. But to be honest, I wasn't completely happy with it. I wasn't at a point where I was eager to create songs for it. So I find often the artist in me is more picky than the computer scientist, So by the time the artist is happy, then I know, we're really creating something good. And so I wanted to go back and create something co-creative, something that would allow some human feedback. And so this was actually done only a few weeks ago. My student and I sat down and wrote a few very, very short stories and tried to see how well would Mabel do to extend them. And here we could talk in first person because actually a lot of the music on which the system was originally trained is in first person. So that was another change. So here's a little snippet that we wrote, which is kind of a loose narrative. A beautiful memory, it was always you, wishing you were back, thinking of only you. Okay, kind of a story that all of us are familiar with, I think. And this got extended into this. The beautiful memory, all my life story, it was always you to make things new. Wishing you were back, but I can't think, thinking of only you, could I make it through? And we already made up a melody for it using Alicia. And we're almost there as far as producing a song. That's the next song that I'm working on. That's been very exciting to now have Mabel and Alicia collaborate. All right, I'm going to briefly discuss future work, and we'll have some time to discuss, ask questions. So there's a lot of technical goals in the future, some of which we already touched on. Perhaps the main one that I'm really curious about is expanding our data and trying neural networks. I think that could lead to very interesting results. And then, of course, also adding the other functionality that we already briefly discussed, like having the system create the long melody all by itself, put together these shorter melodies, having it accompany, arrange by itself, ultimately produce the music by itself. Some people even say sing it by itself. That's the part where I get less happy. But, you know, that would also be fitting. This is brand new. So during my last talk about this, it was on Saturday as part of the Paseo Festival, I said that I give my systems girls' names to increase the number of women in computer science. And people started clapping, and I was really confused because it was a joke, you know. Mabel and Alicia, they're not women. I hope that's clear. They just have girls' names. So I talked about it to my student, Divya, with whom I'm working on Mabel. And she's like, no, she was kind of supporting the audience that I was onto something. And so we talked, and then we arrived at the following plan. We want to create songs that address social justice issues using these two systems, particularly issues centered on women. So the challenges women face in technical fields and sexual harassment problems. And we'll do it fully automatically. We're thinking of looking at some news articles, some pieces written by women about these issues, extracting the key phrases from there, and then using these key phrases, letting Mabel extend it into full lyrics, and then come up with the melodies using Alicia. And that way, Alicia and Mabel would actually be trying to do something positive for women. So that's brand new and very exciting. And of course, what I've already mentioned is that we are planning a live production of this Italian World of Warcraft opera that uses Alicia over the next couple of years. And if you're interested in any of this, there is more information, and there will be more stuff as time goes on my website, myackerman.info. And thank you. Some time for questions. Yeah.
Could you say a little bit more about the training data? You mentioned it was sort of painstaking to, you know, get it in the right annotation format to be able to be used with these systems. But a lot of what you're saying is implying that, well, if you put in this kind of music, it could learn that style. If you put it, you know, so have you been able to experiment with training it on different corpuses and seeing what kind of results you get? And
only a little bit. Only a little bit. Only pop music and Puccini arias, right? So we have two systems, right? So Alicia, we've been working on really hard. That's a system trained on pop. And then we took exactly the same system and we just fed Puccini music. Now there are two challenges with Puccini music. It's a different musical style and it's a different language. So we're losing some of those text-based features. Although we recently found a better dictionary for Italian, so we might be able to fill that in. But we were surprised. At first, the results were really not good with trying on Puccini music. So just because it works well for one type of music doesn't mean it's going to work well for others. Ultimately, I think it's simply because Puccini music is more complicated. There's more to learn. But by the time that we create a good neural network for this, I do expect to see some genre flexibility, at least within genres that are, I don't know, not very far apart. I don't know what would happen if we fit in, for example, Indian music, which is fundamentally very different. That's all left open.
Are you gonna create like just one data model that accommodate all of them, or you're gonna create multiple?
Well, at this point, when you're looking at different languages, so we had to create a different model for the Puccini music. But I think, at least if you're sticking within the same language, like different genres that are all for English, it would be really nice to have one model that would work for different types of musical styles. It would be like this amazing musician that can learn different styles. Yeah.
Yeah, there's two aspects of this that your topic I find really powerful. That is, one is the novelty aspect of it, and the second is the predictive aspect of it. For most of your talk, you've discuss the novelty aspect of it, meaning that Elisa creates a melody or maybe creates a lyric. I was wondering if you can talk more about the predictive aspect of it. And what I mean by that is, just a very specific example. Let's say I wake up this morning, and I'm into Tupac or whatever it may be, and I'm gonna go to work and I feel terrible and I want to be more inspired, right? And and this artist of mine, this is my artist, and you know that I'm into Tupac, but I want something that's inspirational.
So I think I understand what you're getting to. So it's basically like giving you music that you're going to enjoy at that moment in time.
The predictive aspect.
The predictive. So I think probably Karma does a lot of stuff related to kind of the more predictive aspect. In general, so there's a lot of people who could probably chime in. So I mean, there's two ways to respond to that. So if you want like personalized music, we're looking into that in a completely different project. Started playing with biofeedback devices. Figuring out what mental state you're in and how to help you achieve a certain mental state. And down the line, it might be interesting to integrate the two. So to have Alicia compose music based on your needs at the moment to help you reach, for example, a calm state or a more alert state. But that's kind of, I can imagine merging these two projects eventually. But I don't know if that's really predictive. That's more like personalizing, right? Like personalized compositions. I really like the generative angle. There's quite a bit of work in the intersection of computer science and music that is predictive, that tries to, the Pandora is kind of the prototypical example. It tries to figure out what song you're gonna like next based on the music you've listened to. And again, I'm sure people in the room know a lot more about stuff related to that. But I'm really into the generation. I like using these predictive models to make new music. That's what excites me. Does anybody want to chime in?
Well, I see what he's saying in terms of an interesting point of view. In the generative point of view, you can think of a real-time system that actually is generating music on the fly to try and change your mood. That is.
Oh, okay, like that.
Or I can imagine what he's saying is you're listening to this, or this is the music you've liked, and I'm now going to do something on. It's a real-time system, right, which is going to generate music and play it for you right now.
Well, that's like the biofeedback stuff that we're looking at.
Very commonly just send an email. Can you please set it so that I can process my emotions?
Yeah, right. No, I mean it's difficult. It's a difficult problem, but it's definitely something that you can imagine.
I mean, it's a basic. I mean, the very basic thing that could be done very quickly. The biofeedback devices. You know the Muse, those little devices you put on your head. The very basic thing would be to have a few songs that are known through other studies to have certain effects. And you see where the person is at, and you just play them an existing song. That's kind of a simple application of this. But then, of course, personalizing the music to you, that would be really cool.
Well, if you create a reinforcement learning system.
But what if you liked what section you've generated, and then refed that in as part of the training set?
Yeah.
Oh, that's right. So so increasing the training set, absolutely. And I think that can already be done fairly. That wouldn't be very hard to do with Alicia.
A lot of really bad stuff.
No, but if you're using Alicia anyways, you just indicate if you like it or not, and then once in a while retrain.
Device, right? And your brainwaves go crazy.
Well, actually, Blair gave a talk just this week to my class and talked about how your brainwaves are much more accurate than your feedback, than the feedback that you provide. So here we go, connecting all of this with brainwave technology.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Is there any correlation between the meaning of the word and the note that's generated?
Well, a little bit.
For example, like you ended with, if you have a question, I'm thinking actually of a specific case, and then you were more likely to land on the 5.
So we're adding that. We're adding punctuation right now. As features, is there a question mark associated with the syllable? And we're going to add a lot of more like semantic information. It can already learn that, for example, the syllable love might have certain patterns that it might already encapsulate. So I'm really connecting it with the meaning. When you show this to musicians, the reaction is often, how can it do it? It doesn't know what it means. So I think the more it understands what it means, the better it's going to do.
You get more with harmony that way.
So actually there's been a lot of work done on, not a lot, but at least some work on creating chords. But I think incorporating information from the lyrics into the chords can make a really big difference to the mood. Perhaps even more so than incorporating it into the melody. Yeah, exactly. More questions? I'm getting lost here. Yeah.
How much data do you need in order to?
Well, this is actually not that much. It's about 30 songs each. Getting Puccini music was much easier, so we kind of quickly built.
It would be interesting to start looking at two kind of disparate styles.
Yeah.
We did that by accident.
Okay.
That happened by accident. I was so confused. We were retraining it. We were kind of about to submit something pretty quickly, and nothing was making sense. Some part of it felt like pop, some part of it felt like Puccini, and then we realized we combined them. It was actually pretty good. Yeah, so.
Yeah, and then you can do it kind of on an artist level too. So like, if you want to do like Tupac meets Coldplay or something.
Yeah.
And I think that when we originally sat down with this idea, we wanted to be able to say, you pick these specific things. If you had a large enough corpus and be like, I like these people, now learn
Really
from
all
them.
are like
Build
all
a new
at
model
once.
based on those people, does a training set, and go from there. And I think that makes a lot of sense.
Felix?
The singing part, is any work being done on that? So if I want to create a voice that's a mixture of Adele and Lionel Richie, for instance.
So there are a few labs working on it. I don't focus on it, but I kind of, I'm aware of the work, especially for Asian styles. There's already something pretty good. I can dig it up for you. That does a pretty good job singing. I think Chinese music, I'm pretty sure. But there is also a group in the Netherlands working on the same thing using different approaches. If you're interested, I don't remember the names, but I could dig them up for you.
So they can actually take someone's voice and...
Well, no. It's a synthesized voice, but it's a good one. It's kind of, it's able to, given a melody and lyrics, it can sing, which makes me uncomfortable. Now I know how everybody else feels when I try to imitate their expertise.
I just learned about Hatsune Miku, who's a Japanese hologram pop star.
That's it. Yes, yeah, Japanese. Okay, not Chinese. Yeah.
Well done with concatenative synthesis.
With what?
Concatenative synthesis.
Oh, okay. So just like string it together. Yeah.
Like a consumer product you buy and it sings like.
It's her.
Yeah.
But is it just Japanese, or can she do other languages?
It's like very syllabic, so like it's like a consonant and a vowel. I don't think it would be tough to sing in other languages, but
Yeah.
you could probably fake it.
Well, soon the computers will be able to do all of this, right? Yeah.
Were you inspired by someone like David Cope, who, to the best of my knowledge, is the first person who tried to generate like symphonies in the style of Brahms or Tchaikovsky, exclusively using a computer?
Yeah, so David Cope does amazing work, and I'm still very, very impressed by his work. So he kind of chops up, let's say, Bach music into tiny little chunks, and then he has an expert system that recombines them into new Bach pieces that really sound like Bach. He has a great Vivaldi piece about it. So on a technical side, the approach is very different, but definitely as far as intersection between music and computing, it's a wonderful example, and it is an inspiration in that sense, definitely. I've actually been hoping to meet him now that I don't live so far from Santa Cruz. I gotta get on that. I keep planning to invite him. Yeah.
I'm going to step away a little bit from the current topic.
Okay.
You were saying that a lot of companies and institutions are actually interested in the technology that you're developing, but like what specific things that they want to put into.
Oh, I don't know if that's maybe that was extrapolated. I think that there's definitely commercial potential here. I think that it could. I think that there is a market and that it could have a big impact. Whether they're interested or not is a little bit of a separate topic, I guess.
Yeah, I think what you were saying earlier, right, is that we've got a lot of people asking to use it a lot of the time. That we did not anticipate having so many people ask to use the system. But that's the biggest thing. It's not companies that have been coming and asking. It's people, musicians, and other people that we wouldn't have expected to want to use, like a musician, to use it or asking to use it.
An artist, there is this movement towards conceptual art, and I've had conceptual artists wanting to use it. I think earlier on what you saw was media. There's been interest from the media, from from New Scientist and NBC, so like that type of stuff. That's and I'm giving a talk at Google soon, so I don't know, we'll see. Yeah. It's definitely very exciting. I'm not sure exactly where it's going, but I'm really enjoying this ride. Yeah. All right, thank you so much. I'm happy to stay later if anybody wants to talk. Thank you.